Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to another Library 2.0 mini conference. This is Library 2.021, Libraries as Community Anchors. We have a terrific opening keynote getting ready for you. As we start here, we're going to turn some time very quickly over to Dr. Sandra Hirsch from San Jose State University.
Hi, everyone. I am Sandy Hirsch. I'm the Associate Dean for Academics at the College of Professional and Global Education at San Jose State University. And on behalf of the San Jose State University School of Information, I am very pleased to welcome you today to the mini conference that will be addressing libraries as community anchors. This conference is going to talk about the role of libraries as community anchors and how libraries are helping to address challenges in our communities, such as those associated with digital equity, access, inclusion, security, and privacy. I want to especially thank our partners, Dr. Kristen Redman, who's a professor at the San Jose State University School of Information, and Don Means, who's the director of the Gigabit Libraries Network, who helped us put together this outstanding mini conference today. San Jose State University and iSchool is really proud to sponsor this important discussion. And I look forward to hearing more about what libraries are doing to support and bolster their communities during these challenging and constantly changing times. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kristen and Dawn.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. And thanks to Steve for coordinating this event. I'm just excited about our panel. I'm excited about our speakers. And like Sandy said, my name is Kristen Redman. I'm a professor in the School of Information here at San Jose State. I don't know, Dawn, do you want to jump in and say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure, hi. My name's Don Means. I'm the director of the Gigabit Libraries Network, and we're here at invitation and excited to be part of this and looking forward to an exciting opening panel and the remainder of the mini conference.
So what we're going to do is introduce our panel, and Dawn will begin introducing John Windhausen and Patty Wong, and then I'll go ahead and jump in and introduce James and Richelle. Then we'll kind of do a little bit of a round robin or two round robins where we raise some questions, we do some discussion, and then we talk more about what people are passionate about. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Don to do his introductions.
Thank you. We have an extraordinary opening panel, excuse me, today. A wide range of backgrounds, experiences, perspectives. It should be really fascinating to get these different views on the roles of libraries as anchor institutions. Our view is that libraries are the quintessential anchor institution, but we'll get to that and some of those realities that we think make that so. But first, we probably need to get to what anchor institutions are about. We have John Windhausen, the executive director of the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, founded in 2009. With the new administration at that time and a new broadband initiative that came about, and with the need to focus on anchor institutions as separate from the FCC's E-rate program for libraries and schools, a wider view on anchor institutions. John has, even before that, as the founding executive of that, has an extensive background in Washington on the Hill with the FCC, as a leader of one of the leading telecom associations. And John has led Shelby since 2009 to really remarkable situation in DC to provide information both to legislators and regulators, as well as from DC out to the country. We also have Patty Wong, who is the president of ALA, American Library Association, and is the newly installed director of Santa Clara Library. Last time we spoke, it seemed like a couple of weeks ago, she was the director at Santa Monica, which happened to be the first gigabit library in the US, or according to our research. But now at Santa Clara, another awesome system. And thank you both for being here. We have two more panelists that Kristen's going to introduce for us.
Thank you. That's such a great introduction to John and Patty. We also have James P. Neal III. He's the Senior Program Officer in the Office of Library Services with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and just an organization that so many of us are so passionate about. He manages a portfolio of grants focused on building equitable digital communities, including open educational resources, digital inclusion, data privacy and security, open data, civic technology, and ebooks. Just a really broad perspective on so many of these issues that intersect with community anchoring and digital equity. James holds a BA from Morehouse College and is a graduate of the MLS program at the University of Maryland College of Information Science, Maryland's iSchool. So I just want to thank James for being here. We're really, really excited that you're here. Richelle Montoya-Chee is the director of Torreon Community Library in the Navajo Sovereign Nation of New Mexico. And she's the newly elected Navajo Nation Torreon Star Lake chapter president. Her community elected her to this position at the beginning of the year. One of her duties is to oversee the community library, and she's been a fantastic partner for us and has provided a wealth of information in all of our interactions. I've just been learned so much from her. She was born and raised in my apologies for my pronunciation, Nanilzin, New Mexico, which is in Torreon, and she attended the local elementary and high school and now serves as a school board member. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico in 2011, and she is an advocate, a very strong advocate for preserving, practicing, and teaching the Navajo language and culture. So thank you so much, Richelle, for joining us today. I know we're all excited to connect with you more about your perspectives on these issues. So, okay, so that's our panel. We're excited to hear more. We have a first round robin set of questions. As Dawn mentioned, John is just such a star with regard to digital equity for school libraries and health organizations. But you know, a lot of people don't necessarily have a strong frame of reference for thinking about digital anchoring institutions and what do we mean by community anchoring. So we were hoping that you could share some of your perspectives on the concept of libraries as community anchors and your understandings of those terms. And so you just have this wonderful perspective as someone who has significant leadership and policy experience in digital equity. So can you share some of your perspectives on that, on those terms?
I sure will. I'll be happy to. And perhaps I can do so by bringing in just a little bit of history, more history about Shelby, because Don Means was actually the founding chairman of our Shelby Coalition. Started working with Don back at the beginning when we formed in 2009, and Don was a big advocate at that time, I know still is, but he introduced the concept of fiber to the library, and which is a really important concept to get across. And then I ended up co-writing with ALA a paper called Fiber to the Library that sort of built off of Don's work and published on the American Library Association website. But of course, it's not just about fiber, it's also about wireless. And increasingly now we're seeing libraries and schools leveraging that fiber investment as a springboard to launch wireless services out to the rest of the community. And the reason I point this out is that it kind of goes to the fundamental nature of libraries and the Shelby Coalition, because we are not just concerned about the building, and we're concerned about the people around the building, in the building and around the building. And so the reason the Shelby Coalition was formed is that we wanted to be a voice for allowing anchor institutions to embrace these new technologies and not just be sort of passive receptors or consumers of information, but actually engaged with the community in bringing greater and affordable internet access to the general public. So we really see libraries as a jumping off point from which you can then extend service from the library and the library buildings out to the community, whether it's through bookmobiles or kiosks that Don's been working on, or deploying wireless antennas in the community. And this is, of course, has been especially true during this past year and a half during the COVID era, because that connectivity at home has become so much more important than ever. And the libraries can serve as a great anchor tenant on a broadband network. And so there are multiple ways that libraries serve as anchors because they are involved in distributing information to the community, they're involved in distributing broadband to the community, and they can also help to make the economics work of building a broadband network that serves everybody. So in other words, we articulate this as a way to bring broadband to and through the anchor institution as a way, as a low cost and a good business model for serving people and really solving the digital divide by accessing and leveraging those investments made to the libraries and other anchor institutions. Now, we know that we're not the only solution, but what's been really concerning to me is that as a nation, we've kind of hit a cap on broadband adoption. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been kind of stuck at about 70% of consumers who have broadband at home. And that 30% of households still remain unconnected has been fairly stable for the last 3 or 4 years. So what that means to me is that we've tried the traditional methods of expanding broadband access. And the 2010 National Broadband Plan relied a lot upon the private sector to answer the call and step up, which they have done. But I think that means we've only been able to get so far. And now, if we really want everybody connected, that last 30%, we have to think more aggressively and use more innovation and leverage off of those old business models to pursue new and more exciting, innovative technologies like CBRS and TV white spaces in order to make sure that everybody has a connection. So that's the Shelby mission, and it's very compatible with the purpose of this get together today. So I'm very pleased to be a part of it.
Thank you, John. You mentioned a couple of things that really stuck in my mind, this idea of creative collaborations among different agencies. And I know some folks are going to be talking about that more in depth today, which I think is a powerful thing. But you also kind of alluded to some of these challenges. And we think about schools and libraries, and many of us have worked in collaborations with schools as librarians. And so you mentioned COVID. What are some of the other big challenges you're seeing? You mentioned kind of this idea that we've got 30% of the population that's just maybe they're cell phone only. What else are you seeing out there?
Well, it's a big challenge for rural libraries in particular. We've seen through the Emergency Connectivity Fund that the Congress created, an additional $7 billion to the FCC's E-rate program that allows schools and libraries to apply for funding to promote access off the school and library grounds. So in other words, off campus, which the Shelby Coalition has been a big supporter of. And a lot of libraries applied for funding for hotspots. And in those areas where cell phone signals are strong, that's a great solution for the next couple of years. It may not be the best long-term solution, but at least does the job of getting a lot of people connected very quickly. But we heard in a lot of rural markets, the cell phone signal is just not strong enough, and hotspots don't do the job. And unfortunately, you've got to look at other technologies, or not unfortunately, but it means there's a bigger hurdle. You can't just go off and purchase hotspots off the shelf and put in an order and set them up and they work. In a lot of areas that does do the job, but in the more rural markets, it doesn't. So you've got to look at technologies that will extend the signal farther out into the community, like CBRS or like TV white spaces in particular, or even EBS for those that have those licenses. And that rural, extending the signal to these rural areas is probably the biggest challenge that I'm aware of that a lot of libraries are facing. And because of the FCC's rules, that also has been a hurdle, unfortunately, because the FCC imposed such strict 10-year data retention requirements on libraries that a lot of libraries were not able to promise that they could gather that information. And so that discouraged libraries from applying for this funding, which was a real shame. So we are looking to try to turn that around. We are working on Congress to try to appropriate some more money for the ECF program in hopes that we can open up some of the rules to make them more friendly for libraries to be able to apply and extend and purchase technologies that will be more suitable for those rural markets.
Yeah, what you're saying about this issue of propagating signals to new community spaces, I think is so important, but it's not out of the box. It's not, every site is unique, has its own challenges, and the appropriateness of a technology may not be easily predicted until you run a certain amount of tests and have a certain level of technology competency. You also mentioned some of these issues with policies and libraries being concerned about propagating signals if there's policies that undermine some of these strategies. But you've just raised a lot of great stuff. Does anyone have any other follow-ups for John on some of these issues that he's raising? Thank you, John. Or go ahead, Don. Yeah.
No, who was that? Go ahead. Somebody? No, I just wanted to say it's one of the challenges of libraries is they're so pervasive that they become less visible in comparison to schools. Very hard service model of public education and health, huge part of the economy. Libraries have such a wide array of services that they're not easily pinpointed, and they're also invariably local institutions, so they don't have the kind of aggregated power or the aggregated administrative capability to deal with a lot of these things that John talked about. And this is one of the things that John and Shelby has done, is elevate the library to being, a peer anchor institution. As I said earlier, in my opinion, it's the quintessential anchor institution because it does more for more people than any other anchor institution by far. More people are served by libraries, and libraries provide more services, more different services than any other institution. And they also have less antagonists than any other institution as far as that goes, but they just tend to be overlooked. And so Shelby has elevated their reputation and has been a champion for them outside of the normal, the library association kind of thing. So that's an ongoing challenge. And so John, it's still not quite clear what is the meaning, what's the origin of this term anchor institution. It came along in 2009, I think, but what does it actually mean?
Well, we did not invent the term anchor institution, but we certainly have popularized that term. And we're very pleased that now it's become part of the common parlance, if you will, among even broadband policymakers. In the infrastructure legislation that's, we hope, passes Congress in the House here in the next month or two, it mentions anchor institutions 28 times in that bill. So that is a sign of increasing recognition. But yes, Don, the reason that we focused on the term anchor institutions is because we needed a term. The traditional broadband companies divide the world between business and residential. And then we're leaving out all of those community organizations like libraries, but also, community centers, public housing, museums, even houses of worship. These are all anchor institutions because they aggregate a lot of people and they're doing the public good. They're responsible for serving the community. There's a nonprofit institutions dedicated to serving the public, and they needed a collective term that we could all use and identify with. And it sort of has a multi-layered meaning, as you know, with anchor institution, anchor component of the network, but also anchoring the community. And the anchor institutions are the third leg of the stool of a healthy community, in addition to residential and business components. So we have tried very hard to to highlight the visibility of the term anchor institutions, but that's just a starting point for the conversation. Then you have to get into, okay, what technologies work best for this particular marketplace. If you're in a mountainous region, it's going to be different than if you're in the plains. And if you have a lot of rain, it may take a different technology. But the overall point here is that the anchor institutions are should be considered part of the solution to the digital divide, not just a receptor of broadband services to the building, but the Digital Equity Act, it's also in the infrastructure bill, which we hope passes. That's going to provide an additional $2.75 billion for digital literacy training. And libraries are the key set of institutions that could apply for that money and provide greater training for their community. It's not enough to build the network and deploy the services, but also to help people understand the technology and get connected. And so that's another way that libraries can serve as anchor institutions, reaching out to their community and educating them, helping them get connected to overcome that technology fear that a lot of people have.
I think that sounds really exciting. Really exciting.
Kristen, I saw a couple of hands up, but you're managing the time.
I was going to say we're going to be squeaking on the time, and so we better keep moving. And then maybe if we have time at the end, because we have the session at 1, the sessions begin at 1, and so we don't want to constrain that time. So let's press on for now. Maybe if we can send messages in the chat to answer questions, that might be a great way of working through some of those questions for now. So thank you, John. I really appreciate it. You raised some really important issues with challenges that libraries are facing. And Richelle, you've done such a fabulous job in Torreon as a partner, and we know that the context of the sovereign nations, they have their own unique challenges, especially with the COVID context. We didn't talk a lot about COVID as a challenge, but it is something that is affecting us all, but also changing the policy environment in certain ways that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be talking about in the sessions, but also it's added another layer of complexity to the libraries and their efforts to provide internet access. So we were wondering if you could share some of your observations. Can you share with us, your perspectives? What have you been experiencing, and how have librarians in the sovereign nations of New Mexico maybe taken on new responsibilities?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Well, one of the very, very top of the list observations of what we don't have on our Navajo Nation are libraries. We have our Navajo Nation library that is in the capital of our nation, which is in Window Rock, Arizona, which is about 3.5 hours from where my chapter is. And so it's not something that we can utilize on a daily basis if you live in my community. So when we received the library that we have in Torreon about 6-7 years ago, it was amazing to even just be able to have that facility in our community, which meant to a lot of us that grew up going to school that a library means there's a ton of books in there. So that was our first experience with the library. And then came the internet. And in the region that I reside in, our service is we have cell service, we have internet data plans from our cell phones, and we do have a cell phone tower right outside the library. But our region is buttes and mesas and huge rock landform that if you live in one of these valleys, you won't receive any internet at all, even if you have a really good cell phone package that if you go out into our nearest towns, you'll be able to catch your service. But so our library during the pandemic became the lifeline for a lot of our college students, our elementary, middle school, and high school students because a lot of them had to stay home because of the pandemic. But the schools were receiving equipment from the state of New Mexico for us to be able to communicate, to have a communication between the teachers and the students. But again, the internet service is not great. So they had to come to the library to upload their schoolwork, to download their schoolwork, and to do research and to attend classes if they did have their online classes with their college professors. And so that became, as I mentioned before, that was the anchor to the community. That is what kept our students being able to maintain their academic progress. And to me, when I became the official for my chapter, I didn't realize that that was one of my responsibilities, was to help with the library. And so when an opportunity came for us to have better internet, it was just an automatic yes for me, because I have my family that are still students. And so that's the biggest thing I saw, was the library, that my community was so fortunate to have the library in our community. We have 110 communities on the Navajo Nation, and our community is the only one that has a community library. So I'm not sure what all the other chapters in my Navajo Nation have done to be able to keep a connection between our students and our educational institutions.
I think much of what you're describing about taking on new roles and so many people wearing so many different hats in this context is really important. And it's something that is being experienced by lots of librarians and library professionals out there. In terms of your community, like having one library where you are, in some cases, I've heard that there are other libraries, but they may not be registered as part of IMLS's description of libraries, but they do have like cultural centers, community information centers. So I'm wondering if there's some reimagining of some of the spaces in different communities and how they could play new roles in terms of internet access, access to information, after school, things like that.
Mhm. I'm not absolutely sure. I have my hands full with just my community, so I haven't been able to
Yeah.
do any outreach with other surrounding communities around me. But I do know that some of the students from the nearby communities come to our chapter, our library, to utilize the internet outside, because we're able to have that connection. But I know that each of the chapters have what they call a senior center, which is a location for our elders to come and be with one another. And the chapter itself is a facility to bring, like you were stating, cultural activities, cultural lessons, things like that, and into their chapters. That's one of the jobs that we have as chapter officials, to do those things for our communities. So I'm sure that a lot of them are trying their best to get that information out. But because my nation, we're on a status that they call orange, which means that we can only be in a group of less than 15.
Yeah.
And a lot of our facilities are still shut down because of our high spread of the virus and the variants that have just now started coming up. So COVID has really put a standstill on a lot of plans and a lot of the goals that we have as chapter officials for our communities. But we're doing our best, and I really do hope that they're coming up with some awesome ideas to get out to the community.
That's fabulous, Richelle. Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any other questions or comments they'd like to share with Richelle? Okay, great. Well, thank you again. I know that there was somebody in the Q&A that was asking about reporting of statistics. about libraries and internet access. And I just wanted to throw out there that IMLS has their own public library survey, and they've been running it for a long time, and it's a great data set. You should check it out on the IMLS website. And so I guess now I just want to thank Richelle and John again, and then turn it over to Don.
That's a great segue, Kristen. The IMLS survey, and we still don't quite have the data on what connectivity levels are across the library population. We know that a lot of urban libraries are well connected and their branches are well connected, but as you get farther out, the same infrastructure economics principles that have so many people divided apply to the institutions as well. And so a lot of libraries are out there with very weak connections, surprisingly weak connections. Richelle mentioned that they've just upgraded there. I'll use this as a plug, if I may, that Torreon was connected, the Torreon Library was connected with a geostationary satellite service, which is, well, at best it's iffy. It has trouble with weather and the speed and the delay of the signal traveling so far back and forth to these remote satellites. And then through an IMLS grant that Gigabit Libraries was able to win, we were able to award Torreon funding to install and test a new low Earth orbit satellite. We're going to be talking about this technology at 2 p.m. With a breakout session. Everybody's invited to that, and we'll get more deeply into it. But it upgraded the connectivity level quite substantially, that they're able to then support more people doing more high performance computing than before. But that's thanks to IMLS, which is our next speaker here is James Neal, who is a program director, I believe, program manager, if I have it right, James, at IMLS.
Program officer, excuse me, James.
Okay. James, IMLS has had we've all had challenges. Pandemic has just really challenged everybody, personally, institutionally, up and down. IMLS has been flooded, if I could say, with new funding. Sudden increases, more than double the total budget of the agency that it's had for a number of years through the stimulus, the CARES, and so forth. And yet, without really providing IMLS with money to accommodate and handle that, because you were already working kind of at max. So the agency has announced a new plan to create a new strategic plan for next year and beyond, but they haven't actually, as far as I know, released a plan. So we were hoping we'd get a preview of a plan or the general condition of the agency from you, and how it's all gonna. I mean, it's just a necessary agency for libraries around the country, because they just don't have a formal national champion in government other than IMLS, and so it's a really vital role, and I know everybody appreciates that. But what's next? What's going to be coming from IMLS?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Don, and thank you to everyone on the panel for inviting me to participate. This is a really rich discussion, and I look forward to sharing more. With regard to IMLS and a potential strategic plan, we have definitely done a lot of in-house housekeeping, strategizing, and formalizing, and thinking about our road towards the future. We were also very fortunate to have our ears and eyes opened with a request for information that received quite a bit of feedback as we gathered, broad public input to assist the IMLS with our strategic planning process. However, I will not be able to divulge any house secrets at this time, other than to say to you, it's on its way. And if you have any interest in what IMLS is up to, you can always pay attention to our notice of funding opportunities, which are released each and every fiscal year. and which contain quite a bit of information that reveal to an applicant or potential applicant the priorities, goals, and aims of our agency. In the fiscal year 22 Notice of Funding Opportunity, there is language that reads as follows: advanced digital inclusion as broadly defined. Approaches may include, but are not limited to, enhancing digital infrastructures, platforms, technologies, online services, connectivity, digital literacy, privacy and security, as well as creating new processes and procedures needed to sustain a robust online environment. I say all of this to say is that for the foreseeable future and the foreseeable near future, you can rest assured that IMLS will be in the business with an eye on education, workforce development, public safety, and health information. We will continue to support projects and proposals that increase digital inclusion, digital equity, broadband access, and digital literacy, which is perhaps one of the things that we want to focus on most in the near future as we provide access to the internet to populations and communities. Not only do we want to be certain that they have the technology, that they have the devices, but libraries especially are interested in giving folks the knowledge and the skills needed to use this technology. So that's where we stand, and the strategic plan will be released very shortly. I'd also like to thank our director, Crosby Kemper, who is a legendary broadband champion and digital inclusion proponent. He walked into a buzzsaw with COVID and has done a very wonderful job of being sure that our agency is maintained and we're still impacting communities. We have been very happy to get more money, although it has been a very large lift with the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. What we discovered more so than the administrative lift is that there is a large need across libraries, archives, and museums, and we are trying to meet those needs as best we can.
Thank you, James, and I'm sure Crosby appreciates the plug as well.
Well, I'm a big fan of his.
Well, a lot of us are. And he is also a former Shelby alum, former chairman of the Schools Health Library Broadband Coalition, and a champion of broadband, as you say. How would you, IMLS has a lot of areas to focus on. Where would you put broadband, community development broadband in the overall hierarchy or rankings of the priorities of the agency?
Well, I'd say very high, especially with the onboarding of Crosby. He came in and he said, "I'm a digital inclusion guy. This is my jam or my thing," as they say. And certainly the pandemic, interestingly enough, has made the issue elevated. So we're right at that sweet spot of meeting folks where they are in the most need. I came to IMLS about 5 years ago, and I had been a librarian at the Prince George's County Library in Maryland and the head of digital services, and had some direct experience of seeing folks, who were working with issues related to the homework gap. There was one particular family that would come to the library and they would stay up until the very end of our closing hours, huddled around a computer about 4 or 5 deep, trying to get homework done. And I kept asking myself, why is this? And then I realized they didn't have, internet at home or a computer at home to complete the homework. So, it's an ongoing issue. IMLS is covering lots of different things, but digital inclusion, broadband access, but especially digital literacy, remains very, very high.
All right, that's great. We have really fortunate here to have both the leading public agency for libraries as well as the leading association of libraries represented on our panel. And as I look at it now, I see we're very US centric on this opening panel. But hopefully a lot of this is applicable wherever you live, wherever your library is. And there is a global movement on policy and support of libraries. The International Federation of Library Associations doing wonderful work all over the place. As James just mentioned, and as John and Richelle had also mentioned, that connectivity has gone from being, really, really important to essential now in the context of this pandemic, which has just upset everything and all of our models. And so fortunately, we also have Patty Wong, the current president of ALA, and as I mentioned, the library director in Santa Clara. And Patty, while connectivity is essential, as has been said, it's also insufficient. As John was pointing out, there's something else going on that doesn't really complete the connection for people, even if there is available connectivity. So ALA has been really important in digital equity. Not that IMLS has not, but what as leading this agency, the association, what is it that ALA is looking to do for digital equity in the year ahead?
Thank you, Don, and greetings to all of our listeners out there, and welcome to everyone on the panel. One of the things that ALA is doing right now is we passed a resolution in 2021 making digital equity a strong focus of our legislative work. And so that meant that the resolution called for universal broadband to be recognized as a human right, as essential as running water and electricity. That allowed us actually to not only share this information with all of our national and international partners, but then to be able to levy some of the conversation to think about internet access, low cost, robust internet access, and access in general for our wider national communities, as both not a national issue, but also an international issue. And so we have signed the pledge with IFLA to that effect. I think the bigger issue for us is that we need to keep that at the forefront and keeping libraries not only a bipartisan issue, so we can actually make sure that we get additional funding from and support, but that the internet access and the lifeline actually that we provide to our extended communities as community anchors should be recognized in legislation as a whole. We're even talking about actively at this moment, instead of being reactive to legislation, is actually to think about how we can be proactive about legislation to that impact. As you know, libraries nationwide have really kept our communities connected, and the staff internationally as well as nationally responded and pivoted all of their services to try to connect our communities. I think Richelle had a great example of how isolated and geographically isolated communities are, and that libraries provide that anchor. But we need to do more, as both you and John have mentioned, that investment in libraries, but in broadband capacity and Wi-Fi and services connected and connecting people is essential. And while emergency funding has really been a nice needed boost, it's not enough. It's certainly not enough. One of the things I did want to mention is the advocacy work that our Public Policy and Advocacy Office does in Washington, D.C. We've received more funding where libraries are actually in the name and identified in funding through LSTA, through ARPA, through the CARES Act. More federal funding has come in the than these last couple of years than in the last 20. So we need to leverage what that looks like, and we need to take action. A big advocacy step for us is after nearly a decade or so of advocacy, by the library community, the FCC is planning to issue an order that will make permanent changes to the E-rate program so that will make tribal libraries eligible to apply. That's a major change in legislation, and we need to be proactive in looking at our existing legislation, but also making changes. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think we need all of our partners working together with us in order to move this forward for the country's benefit, our communities. Digital inequity is the digital gap is an equity issue, and it pertains to across the board, all people who call this home.
Indeed. And on that point, Patty, we've been talking about this divide for, well, as long as we've been talking about digital, and certainly the future, as we've now come to start looking at it, is more digital, even more digital. And that must be true for libraries as well. And yet, somehow it hasn't really caught up. And actually, the investment is not going into catching up. The primary investment in infrastructure is going into the places that are already connected, the urban areas. Not all of the urban areas, a lot of places in urban areas are poorly served, but generally speaking, in places where there's already a fairly robust infrastructure. So that means the people that have weaker connections are falling even farther behind. So the digital divide seems to be even getting bigger, even as people are moving ahead a little bit in the rural areas. The people in the urban areas are just racing ahead, and that's kind of true in skills and the rest of it. How would you balance does ALA balance this sort of infrastructure or connectivity side with the skills and access side of things? They're both important, of course, both critical.
Don, that's an important question. I think one of the things that I wanted to share today is that, ALA as an organization can do the advanced work, I think, of providing training and lobbying for funding and developing the resources. And I certainly know that our Public Library Association, our academic ACRL, we're all working, I think, in concert with each other. But I think one of the things that we need to empower our local communities to think about is how we can proactively engage our immediate partnership as communities to look at infrastructure. And it may, while we're waiting for and being strong advocates for larger legislation and advancing the work that needs to happen nationally, I do think that we need to pay attention to our local communities to find out exactly where the needs are most, and to provide instruction and elevation and motivation to connect partners together who can help make some things happen. So I wanted to share very quickly, if I could, just a couple of examples. And actually, I think, John, you've seen some of these before. One of the things I wanted to mention is a small example that happened in Yolo County, and where I was county librarian, how the library took the initiative to look around at our existing community infrastructure, and we created a broadband plan. Now, how did we do that? We worked with all of the cities, but Yolo County, it's about 180,000, maybe it's 210,000 people now. It is 2/3 very much agrarian, very much rural, very much under-resourced in terms of internet access. But all of that agricultural community needed internet access actually to feed the rest of the country, because our county provides, when we were in Yolo, many households with the produce and everything that people hold dear in terms of the food connection. So that broadband plan happened as a result of connecting with our local area formation county operations in terms of our LAFCO and county IT. Our county library was a critical piece of that, but we also involved the cities of Woodland, West Sacramento, Winters, and Davis, all of our ISPs and elected representatives. Now, why was all of this important? It's because we needed all the people at the right table to come together and decide that internet access was an important part of our community. So much so that we needed to throw aside any politics and actually focus on the digital needs of our community. We work with school districts. We worked with community-based organizations. That resulted in our community going from T1 lines, to be honest, that's all we had, to 1G, and then to 10 Gs for almost the entire county. Now, how was that able to happen? Not only were we able to put that broadband plan together, but we involved Yolo County Housing, CAL FIRE, Valley Vision, and Scenic, all community-based organizations and coalitions of agencies that were very frontward facing in terms of digital access. With CAL FIRE, what they did was they loaned us access to their towers. So we took existing internet infrastructure. Some of it was underground, most of it was not. And we made an absolute choice to involve the right people in the right room. I will say that it evolved into significant changes in the way we operate as a community too. So I suggest that to all of us, because I do think that we have the opportunity to use resources at hand. And we do have, I encourage all of our libraries out there and our library staff to please check around you to see who has infrastructure already, to see if you can piggyback and work well together, because there's a lot of things that can take place locally too. I did want to mention just very quickly that as we're talking about community anchors, know that our infrastructure is different in every different community, but some communities are doing some fantastic things. In Santa Monica, our CityNet connectivity is going to all of our low-income housing. In Santa Monica, we also opened Open Plus, which is a self-service model to expand library services. When here in Santa Clara, we, during the pandemic, we continued to broaden the reach of our broadband Wi-Fi so that we could service more community members, and turned it on permanently, never turning it off. I did want to mention Harris County Library System in Houston really did apply for one of those FTC grants. If successful, they haven't occurred quite yet, they are ordering 40,000 hotspots and 10,000 Chromebooks. Now, I know that's not as appealing to some of you, because your cell phone access is very limited already. And so the hotspots may not work for you. But in communities where, Chris Martinez, who is the IT lead at the library there in Harris County, did a needs assessment of his community near Houston and found out that 600,000 Houston residents were without internet access.
Wow. Patty, this is great. The collaboration, and appreciate especially your call to action. We're just running right up against our time window now. And
I apologize, thank you.
That's okay, but you set us on a good close, and that is the call to action. You just made one to get involved and be the collaborator for development. And so I wanted to go back to our other panelists and ask them for a call to action. So,
or something that you're just really excited about.
Exactly.
That you'd like to share.
John, why don't you give us a call to action?
Well, thanks, Don. I've got several that I could talk about, but I think the most important one for this audience would be the additional funding coming from Congress through this infrastructure bill, and also the U.S. Treasury has already received $10 billion for capital projects. So this 10 billion plus the potential for another 65 billion coming, it's all going to go from the federal government, but to the states. And that means the governors are going to have an awful lot to say about how that money is distributed. So my call to action would be to encourage libraries and library leaders to develop and court if you will, the governor's state broadband officials, because they are going to have a lot to say about how this money is expended. And we want to make sure that libraries get their fair share of the funding. As I said earlier, the ECF program that the FCC is administering is a little disappointing because of the restrictive rules that discourage libraries from applying. We don't want that same thing to happen with this next round of funding, which could be 10 billion plus 65 billion, or a total of 75 billion coming down the pike for broadband and anchor institutions. Now, there's a wrinkle in the infrastructure legislation that suggests anchors could be treated as third in priority. So you need to work extra hard to make sure they don't consider libraries as third in priority, but as part of the solution to connect to the unserved and underserved locations. So my call to action would be, go talk to your governor's offices and your state broadband officials to get access to that funding.
Does Shelby have any kind of vehicle to guide that kind of action, or are you just saying, call the governor?
We are putting together talking points that, brief 1 and 2 page document that can help you formulate the right messages to convey to your state government policymakers.
That's great, John, and really timely too.
Yeah.
Richelle, give us a call to action. What do you think we should all be doing? Richelle? Yeah.
Hi, this is Richelle. Sorry. To me, I feel like we should be advocating for more libraries in rural communities and all communities. So like I stated in the 110 chapters on my nation, my community plus the capital of our nation are the only 2 communities that have libraries. They're very beneficial.
That's wonderful. And I couldn't agree more. We've talked to a lot of state libraries who say, well, all our libraries are pretty well wired. Well, is there a library in every community in your state? Well, no, they're not. Well, maybe you could open some more branches out there and find new ways to deliver those services, especially digital.
Yes.
That's a great idea.
I love it. I love it. James.
Yes, I have one thing to share that I'm very excited about, and that's the growth and proliferation of a model that's called digital navigators. IMLS made some investment in a program at the Salt Lake City Public Library earlier in the pandemic, based on this model of the digital navigators program, whereby which you're seeing one-to-one direct interaction of support for folks who are without internet at home, or may lack devices, or may lack the knowledge that is necessary to use the internet. It's caught on very well. A lot of work has been supported by our collaborators and partners in the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, as well as the Urban Libraries Council. Both of those organizations are to be commended for their work and support in these efforts. I think the Digital Navigators model is a great model for replication across the United States for libraries that seek to join in digital inclusion coalitions, or they themselves who would like to be a part of direct service in digital inclusion. Thank you.
Excellent.
This is great. But Pat, we are coming up against our time. Patty, did you actually mention what you were most excited about or wanted to call to an action? I felt like we're running out of time, but I wanted to give you another chance.
Well, I think everyone has explored what we need to do. I think we also need to work for stronger legislation at all levels to benefit our most needed communities. And we need to find a way of connecting, especially our rural and geographically isolated communities.
There's one more thing we can all do. There's one more thing we can all do, and that is go to one of the breakout sessions that are following this
yes
panel. It's a fantastic list.
A call to action.
Yes, right now, something you do now. We've got an amazing list of speakers from all over, National Librarian for Ghana, and it's a more international breakout, and it touches a lot of issues that we talked about here. And
we've got some doctoral students out there, which are our future, which I'm excited about to see as well.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Patty and John and Richelle and James. Fantastic. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And thanks to Kristen and Don
Thank
for
you.
hosting the panel, and a special thanks to San Jose State University School of Information, who are the founding co-sponsors of this conference. So please check your schedule and jump right into the next set of sessions. Thanks, everybody. Bye, Neal.
Bye.
Bye.